Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the seventh and final session of the 2022 Annual Town Meeting. Mr. Yassin has a question of privilege. Mr. Yassin, if your question of privilege is that you were omitted from the list of speakers that I read off when we had a motion for the question on Article 30, I admit my error. I missed your name on the chat monitor's screen, and I apologize for that. If you have something else to say it.
Mr. Gatsby, Martin Yassin, Precinct 17. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can. Did you hear what I said?
Yes, sir, I did hear what you said. And I just wanted to briefly say, Mr. Gatsby, that as we approach this final evening of the spring town meeting, I am sure that I speak for all of the town meeting members when I take this opportunity to thank you for the selfless, gracious, and highly competent service that you have rendered to Brookline by stepping up and moderating this difficult spring town meeting in Kate Pulverman's absence. The town as a whole owes you deep gratitude for enabling our oft-times fractious political discourse to respectfully proceed. And we thank you, sir, for your service. Thank you very much.
Well, I blush. Thank you very much, sir. Before we start, I have the usual series of vote corrections. Again, I will read the yes vote, then the no vote, and then the abstention totals. These are corrections of the session of last evening. Article 29, main motion, 143, 83, 9. Article 34, main motion, 117, 110, 14. Article 26, motion to refer, 127, 113, 4. Article 27, main motion, 95, 126, 18. Article 30, main motion, 188, 29, 19. We have a motion by Ms. Vogt to advance Article 35 and deal with it as the first item of business this evening. She would like to do this in order to accommodate a co-petitioner and co-speaker who is not available after the first half hour. This is a debatable motion, and Mr. Rosenthal, you have a question of privilege?
Yes, sir, although it's shorter because, oops, am I on?
Yes, you're on.
Yeah, thank you. It's shorter because it must be contagious for various Martins because Mr. Yassin pretty much jumped my gun. I too want to thank you and commend you for stepping forward without the full pay of the active moderator, Kate Pulverman, and doing a yeoman job. And one thing I do want to cite is something I, for some reason, have to put into the PAX newsletter every year by Aristotle. Criticism is something we can avoid easily by saying nothing, doing nothing, and being nothing. And people underestimate how hard your job is and Kate's job. And even when you criticize me, usually wrongly, I very much appreciate everything you're doing. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, Mr. Rosenthal. No more of that, please. Thank you very much, however. We're in the middle of a motion by Ms. Vogt to hear Article 35 as the first item of business. I said it's an accommodation to her Petitioner. Yeah, Mr. Birnbaum, question of privilege.
Hello, Lee Birnbaum, Town Meeting Member Precinct 9. This was actually from last night that did not get called at the end of the night. But as a note to whomever prints these supplements, the black text on a red background is invisible to many forms of color blindness. Obviously, I was able to receive the text online as a backup, but especially if we're going to be in person and they're distributed at the door, just please a note to consider color contrast when printing out the multicolored sheets so that it can be read by all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll advise our printer of your point, which is well taken. Motion by Ms. Vogt. Is there a second? Motion has been seconded. This is debatable, and Representative Vitolo would like to speak in opposition to it. Representative Vitolo.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I am Tommy Vitolo, Town Meeting Member at Large and State Representative representing Brookline, and I promise you will get no words of thanks or praise from me.
Thank you very much.
It is my understanding that there are several Brookline residents, non-town meeting members, who drive for one or more app-based companies who have signed up to speak tonight, and taking the warrant articles out of order on the very night that we are hearing them not only dishevels the schedule for town meeting member speakers on the various articles, but it frankly means that a number of our guests will not have the opportunity to speak at the 7 o'clock hour, but will be deferred to a time uncertain because of this last minute reordering, and in deference to our guests, drivers for Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and so forth who wish to speak on warrant article 31, as long as you confirm that there are such speakers in your speaking list, I am inclined to vote against the motion.
Thank you. Well, the less debate we have, the sooner we'll get to Article 31. It will not take us that long to get through Article 35. And yes, there are speakers, driver speakers for Article 31, so that if town meeting is convinced that you have the better of the argument here, they can vote against the Ms. Vogt's motion to advance Article 35. We'll now take a vote on that motion. A yes vote will advance Article 35. A no vote will defer it until its natural order, which is after we deal with Articles 31 and 32. Ready for a vote? Voting period is commenced. Do we have anyone on the phone? Okay, we got 106 yes, 80 no, 29 abstentions. Motion carries by a vote of 106 in favor, 80 opposed, and 29 abstentions. The motion under Article 35 is on page 35-6 over to page 35-7, moved by Ms. Vogt, seconded by Mr. Leibovitz, that the town adopt a resolution relating to the TMMA listserv, urging the TMMA to ensure that future messages sent to the listserv shall be publicly readable. This, of course, town meeting has no jurisdiction to require that the TMMA take this action, but I'm sure that if this motion passes, the TMMA will take it under advisement. We'll, in any case, hear from a couple of the officers of the TMMA about all of this in due course. I call first on Ms. Vogt.
Hi. Hi, I'm Marissa Vogt. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 6. And do you have my slides? Great.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all for your flexibility in allowing my citizen co-petitioner Jonathan Klein to speak. I'd like to thank my co-petitioners, Mike Toppel and Jonathan Klein, and also acknowledge many other town meeting members and community members for their thoughtful discussions that inspired this warrant article. Next slide, please. Warrant Article 35 is a resolution about the accessibility and transparency of town meeting business. This non-binding resolution asks the Town Meeting Members Association, or TMMA, to make its group email list publicly readable no later than September 1st, 2022. This target date was chosen so that the public would have easy access to discussion about warrant articles for the fall town meeting. Next slide, please. The TMMA is a group that is open only to town meeting members in the town of Brookline. In the weeks and days before each town meeting, much of town meeting's business occurs behind the scenes on something called the listserv, a private email group sponsored by the TMMA. The listserv's stated purpose is for open discussion of issues pertaining to town meeting, the warrant, and any related town, precinct, or neighborhood issue. Messages sent to the listserv include community updates, but also discussion and questions about proposed legislation, and critical updates about town meeting scheduling, amendments, and other formal business. However, messages sent to the listserv are not readable by the general public, including town staff, some townwide elected officials, and citizen petitioners who may have sponsored a warrant article that's being discussed. Next slide, please. This resolution aims to increase the transparency of town meeting business by making the TMMA listserv readable by the general public. Making listserv messages public would engage residents and inform voters about the opinions and work of their elected representatives. Transparency and openness are critical to a functioning town government and are even more important now that the Brookline tab has ceased publication. There are practical arguments for making the TMMA listserv public too. There are currently over 300 people subscribed to the listserv, so there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. And in fact, messages do get forwarded, but often only to folks with insider status. Making the listserv publicly readable would be a step toward ensuring every member of the public has equal access to town meeting deliberations. Additionally, listserv emails are public records, and there is a formal process through which they can be requested from the town clerk. But that process can be slow and would use town staff time. Next slide, please. Warrant Article 35 is the right approach for making town meeting discussion public. While the TMMA board has the ultimate authority over the listserv policies, TMMA meetings are infrequent and are relatively poorly attended. One of our goals in proposing this resolution was to foster a discussion among the full town meeting membership that could inform the TMMA board. Town meeting has taken a similar approach in the past. In a November 2010 resolution, town meeting surveyed its members on their meeting scheduling preferences, even though scheduling decisions are not ultimately something that's within town meeting's authority. And while perhaps the ideal solution moving forward would be for email discussions to occur on a town-owned email list, it's not practical to expect this change to occur without agreement and help from the TMMA. People are creatures of habit, and making behavioral changes stick is very difficult. Some of you may remember last year's effort to create a Google email group discussion focused only on warrant article discussions. That new group received a few dozen emails in May 2021, but it was quickly abandoned because folks are simply used to writing to the listserv. It's just not practical to create a new separate open email list. Any changes will need to be made to the TMMA listserv because that is the primary method through which town meeting members communicate with each other electronically. Next slide, please. Finally, you will hear arguments focusing on the TMMA's status as a quasi-private organization. But as you can see from the world's most boring Venn diagram here on the right, there is no way to distinguish between town meeting members and the TMMA. So don't be fooled. The TMMA is not just a private organization. And even if it were, even if the TMMA were private, there's ample precedent for town meeting passing resolutions that apply to private individuals or businesses. And again, the listserv is regularly used to conduct public business. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, voting yes on this resolution will send a strong message to the TMMA that the listserv should be readable by the public. Voting no would keep important town meeting business hidden in secret away from the public. So in the interest of transparency, public engagement, and efficient access to public records, please join me in voting yes on warrant Article 35.
Now, Ms. Vogt, you've been almost 5 minutes. You did not ask for extra time. I gave you some accommodation as the principal petitioner of this article, but I'm going to hold further speakers to the time limits to which they're subject. Ms. Hardebeck?
Good evening, Kelly Hardebeck, town meeting member from Precinct 7, speaking for the advisory committee tonight. As you heard from the petitioners, the goal of warrant Article 35 is to improve the transparency of discussions town meeting members have via the email on the TMMA list by encouraging the TMMA board to make the list publicly readable by September 1st of this year. This resolution would apply only to communication made after the change to the list was implemented. The advisory committee reviewed and discussed the article, and our discussion centered around 3 topics. First, whether a resolution of town meeting was an effective way to request this change. 2, the technological changes necessary to change access to the list. And 3, the potential impact that making the TMMA list publicly readable might have on the openness and freeness of our discussion. So, as noted, the Town Meeting Members Association is an independent operation that operates the TMMA email list, which all members of town meeting are invited to join. TMMA volunteers maintain and moderate this list, and people who are not members of town meeting, for example, at-large members of advisory committee, are part of the list to better facilitate communication about upcoming meetings, hearings, and to provide additional detail on issues coming before town meetings. The petitioners feel this information should be more widely available as it will help members of the public better understand matters coming before town meeting and positions taken by their TMMs. They also feel that bringing this article before town meeting will allow us to discuss the change and therefore provide input to the TMMA. But as noted, it's a non-binding resolution. During our discussion at advisory and at a subcommittee hearing, members of the TMMA board expressed concern about the warrant article itself, the level of effort needed to implement the change. This warrant article, again, targets an independent organization and asks them to make a very specific change. During our discussion, petitioners cited other warrant articles, such as the ban on crated veal and fur products, that they felt were similar. However, none of those asked a single organization in town to make a change to the services they provide or their operational processes. Previously, requests have been made to TMMA leadership to make the list more widely readable, and historically, the board has not taken action on those requests. There was enormous recognition and appreciation that the TMMA list is staffed and maintained by volunteers, and this change would require additional work to configure a separate read-only audience. Maintaining 2 lists would require additional ongoing work, and it was unclear if each new member of the public wishing to read the list would need to be added manually via a request process, or it would just be open. It's important to note that regardless of the technology used and the manner in which this change would be effected, this would be additional work that needs to be done by a volunteer, and all of our time is scarce these days. Finally, there was some discussion at
I hope
AC
you
about
heard
the
me.
potential
Please
effect that
conclude,
opening the
Ms.
list.
Hardebeck.
Thank you. In conclusion, the advisory committee chose not to make a recommendation on this particular warrant article because it felt it had no better understanding of the subject matter, and the decision should be left to individual town meeting members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Friedman?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Harry Friedman, town meeting member, precinct 12, corresponding secretary of the TMMA, speaking on behalf of the TMMA executive officers in opposition to the warrant article. Warrant Article 35 asks town meeting members to voice an opinion on opening up the TMMA listserv to the outside world on a read-only basis. The petitioners are members of the TMMA board. One might argue that bringing this issue up at a meeting of the board might have been a more appropriate strategy. Or if they really wanted to poll town meeting members, they could have put out a poll on the listserv. Or they could have simply started a new list using whatever rules they thought appropriate. They have chosen to do none of these things, and I suppose at this point that's water over the dam. What changes would ensue from an open listserv? It would still not allow members of the select board or advisory committee to opine and debate matters that come before them, at least under current interpretations of the open meeting law from the Attorney General's office. Nor would it allow non-town meeting members to post. However, it would make what is posted on the listserv more public. I say more because anything posted today on the listserv can be forwarded. However, that takes effort. Automatically allowing public viewing would increase the likelihood of postings going viral. Proponents argue that this is a good thing because it increases transparency, a supposed universal good. Transparency can act as a disinfectant, but at some point the disinfectant can become too strong, like bleach, and have deleterious effects. Transparency in and of itself is neither the sine qua non nor the be-all and end-all of good government. It can cease to be a good thing. The current listserv functions well, not perfectly, as everyone here knows, but effectively. It enables town meeting members to ask questions, some smart, some stupid, and get answers without anyone playing to the cameras. It allows limited debate, generally by the small subset of town meeting members who actually post, that supplements the real debate here at town meeting. More importantly, deliberations here at town meeting will continue to be fully transparent as we debate fully in front of the public. How far should transparency go? Should the deliberations of PTOs be public? After all, they involve the public schools. Should all discussions at other civic organizations be public? The endorsement meetings at PACs, Brookline by Design, Brookline for Everyone, and others are hardly free and open to the public, and these groups are composed largely of town meeting members. What Article 35 change will do, however, is more easily allow postings on the listserv to be chopped, edited, taken out of context, and posted on that open sewer, Facebook. There, affected town meeting members can be prohibited from posting or explaining their positions. It will allow the greater spread of misinformation and opinion posing as fact. The advantages supposedly brought by transparency will be outweighed by the unintended repercussions. Warrant Article 35 is simply a bad idea. It takes a platform that works, albeit imperfectly, and degrades it, not only making it less useful to town meeting members, but bad for the public at large and for the operation of town governance. Please vote no.
Thank you, Mr. Klein.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Jonathan Klein. I am a co-petitioner. I live at 150 St. Paul Street, and I'm a former TMM from Precinct 10. I now live in Precinct 17, where I did not make the cut in the recent town election. I appreciate and thank you for changing the order tonight to allow me to speak, since I have a conflict later this evening. I filed this as a town meeting member, and I thought it was valuable then. Now, as a former town meeting member and a resident voter, I think it's even more important. I had 5 points I wanted to make, but I first want to make 2 additional points to address things that have come up. First of all, an issue was raised about technical concerns. Those should not be a concern. The petitioners had detailed discussions with the current moderators. We explained our proposal. We proposed a technical solution to them, and they agreed that it was feasible to implement that and not, I think, excessively difficult. So I think technical issues should not be a constraint. The second issue that got raised just a minute ago by Mr. Friedman is that this is available to anyone because it can just be forwarded. Well, that's really just about privilege. You have to know someone who's willing to take the time and effort to forward it. It privileges people who are insiders, and it excludes people who are outsiders and just want to be able to find out what's going on in the town. So I think neither of those points is compelling. So let me just go to my 5 points, and then I will be done and out of your hair. First, this is about basic transparency. That is a good. Substantive issues are being discussed. We should give citizens who want the opportunity to be fully informed to do so. It's really important for prospective TMMs, members of other town boards like myself, the HAB, who have no access to it. And I think it's very clear that more transparency, more discussion, more citizen engagement with our work, with the work of town meeting is valuable. Second, there is information posted on this list that is often available nowhere else. As a citizen and a non-TMM co-petitioner, how am I to know when warrant articles will be heard, when the order will be switched, when I should plan to be here? I don't think it's reasonable for me as a citizen to watch 100% of town meeting just to find out these things. This is the listserv is where the moderators post this information. And there are often other important and useful postings, for example, about the ARPA process that are very hard to find on the general town website. Third, there is no reasonable expectation of privacy in a list with over 250 members. These deliberations, as was pointed out, are routinely forwarded to others, and to my knowledge, there are no rules against doing so. Fourth, it is my understanding the town council has ruled that these are public records, so any member of the public is entitled to request them. But why would you encourage that mess and confusion of responding to multiple requests when you can just make them available? And I guarantee you, if you don't make them available, I'm going to start requesting them regularly and routinely, because that's my right to do so. And finally, fifth, this is an appropriate issue for town meeting. It is the purview. I'm sorry. Why is this appropriate for town meeting since it's the purview of the TMMA? The answer is all town meeting members are automatically part of the TBA. It is not a private organization. That is a fiction. It is an organization for all town meeting members and other public officials. It is a public organization serving a public purpose. This is where we gather. This is where you gather. I'm not part of you anymore. The TMMA gets a fraction of the attendance. And this is, I point out, only a resolution urging that the board of directors of the TMMA take action. We adopt resolutions all the time. I apologize again. You adopt resolutions all the time. And this is a much more pertinent thing to adopt a resolution about since it affects the town process than many of the other things that you discuss. So I thank you for your time. I ask you to vote favorable action on warrant article 35 and have a good evening.
Mr. Klein, I don't believe it's correct that town council has ruled that these are the town meeting TMMA listserv communications are matters of public record. Mr. White, are you with us? You have George White. Yep, Mr. White, you need to get on a device.
Okay. Sorry.
There you go.
George Abbott White, Precinct 9, President, Town Meeting Members Association. I can't really improve on what my colleague, what Harry has said so far. I think it makes perfect sense. But I will say two things. Like the First Amendment, which I taught many years in school, pointing out to students it is not an absolute. The mantra of transparency is beginning to wear a little thin. If the TMMA, on the one hand, is a small group of people, sort of, the chattering class of not much significance, then why in the world take a listserv that supposedly only a few people kind of post to and want to open it up? The two questions I have besides that are, how far are people willing to go using the notion of candor to in effect stifle debate? We know that in all kinds of deliberations, people either close the door or close the window and have at it. They speak their mind. To open up the listserv, which I think has had some very good information on it, and some interesting discussions, and even some sharp and useful debates. I think it's a misunderstanding of the purpose of that kind of communication. The second thing is, which I take it as a negative, is the idea of privilege. And it's my understanding in government for eons that certain discussions were privileged. They were part of a deliberative process. I'm sure the lawyers in the room have got this down. And to disturb that in the course of opening up the listserv, I think does, as Harry said, a real disservice. So I'm going to encourage people to vote no. And I'm also going to encourage them to try to attend to more serious business. This is not the thing to be spending time on. Thank you very much.
So there's been a great hue and cry about whether posts on the listserv are matters of public record according to town council. Is Mr. Callanan on the logged in? I understand it. We're gonna hear from Mr. Callanan before we start down the point of order route, if he's available. Mr. Callanan?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, and the
Okay.
question, of course, is whether you have ruled that posts on the list, on the TMMA listserv, are matters of public record.
I wouldn't say I've ruled on that, but in response to a question about the previous article about group texting in the WhatsApp, based on that research, I would think that posts to the town meeting member association listserv are also public records because they're created by officials of the town meeting members, about something in regards to their appointment, town meeting. So for example, the Massachusetts Municipal Lawyers Association is a listserv that I'm a member of. So municipal lawyers can ask other municipal lawyers questions. And for example, in response to the question from the moderator about whether group texting were public records, I posted a question to those municipal lawyers. That would be a public record. So the dozen or so responses I received from other municipal lawyers, in addition to the lawyers I consulted within the office, are unanimous that these electronic communications by town meeting members, and again, they're representative town meeting members and not open town meeting members, but representative town meeting members about town meeting would be public records because the public records law is applied so broadly. That being said, I've tried to schedule a conversation with a supervisor in the compliance office of the supervisor of public records office, and I haven't been able to connect with her about. The question that I have is about how are these retained? Where I have no doubt they're public records, I don't know what responsibility the town has or town meeting members have to retain these documents, and how would we go about responding to any public records requests we may receive? Do I have to ask for all 250 members to give me all their group text or listserv. So that's an area I'm unsure of, but I am pretty confident in the opinion that even town meetings posting to a listserv would be a public record.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Kovac, do you still want to make a point of order about that issue?
Yes, please. Thank you. Christina Kovac, town meeting member, precinct 8. Town council just mentioned that the listserv is public record because it pertains to town meeting and the emails are posted by town meeting members. I just wanted to make a clarification of fact there. And it's not public record because town meeting members are subject to public record. It's public record because select board members and advisory committee members are also included in the town meeting member listserv, and their emails are subject to public record. So that swoops in town meeting member emails, but on their own, town meeting members emails would not be public record.
Well, of course, we advise members of the advisory committee and select board that they shouldn't be posting anything on the TMMA listserv, but for whatever that's worth. All right, I'd like to continue with Mr. Leibovitz.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Moderator. Alec Leibovitz, Precinct 8. Last night, we began an important conversation about improving transparency for town meeting. Tonight, we have an opportunity to take a major step towards creating a more accessible, more transparent form of town government in the form of Warrant Article 35. The Town Meeting Member Association listserv is an invaluable resource for town meeting members, both new and old. It serves as a resource to receive updates on town meeting operations and outcomes, announcements from the moderating team, and as a forum for debate and questions between town meeting members and other town officials. As a new member myself, combing through the TMMA archives has proven invaluable for getting caught up to speed on pressing issues before town meeting and the accompanying procedural minutia that come along with them. Having access to the listserv has allowed me to better understand the way our town government works and my own representatives' beliefs and the considerations they take regarding upcoming votes on contested issues. If we as a body remain committed to transparency, good governance, and community engagement at the grassroots level, I see no compelling reason why we should keep this forum and resource out of view of our neighbors and constituents. During this annual town meeting, we've had confusion among warrant article sponsors about what night their motions were being heard. I've been contacted personally by constituents who do not understand what we are voting on, when we are voting on it, or how their own representatives will vote. These concerns and many others would be effectively addressed by making the TMMA listserv accessible to the public. And while we cannot compel the TMMA to take this action, as the membership of the TMMA, this vote should serve as a gauge of the sentiment of the TMMA membership, which I hope will be heeded by the TMMA leadership. As we just heard from Mr. Callanan, these messages are already public records, and a true commitment to transparency would demand that we make these records available to the public that we serve. If we feel strongly enough about smaller private chats to pass a separate resolution, I must believe that we care similarly enough about transparent government that we make this deliberative forum that is comprised of all of town meeting and townwide elected officials accessible to the public. And to those concerned about private communications occurring contemporaneously with town meeting proceedings, I would note that last evening, following deliberation of Warrant Article 34, I counted at least 7 postings from different town meeting members on this listserv, deliberating about that night's business. I feel this is inconsistent with the sentiment of Warrant Article 34, which we expressed last night was the will of this body, if we do not similarly make the TMMM listserv available to the public. Let's be consistent on this issue. Let's advocate for good governance. Let's commit to transparency and to allowing our neighbors to not only view our deliberations twice a year, but to be informed on our thoughts, opinions, and actions as their representatives throughout the year. I urge you to vote yes on this resolution, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Nangle.
Richard Nangle, town meeting member, precinct 15. Full disclosure, I am a TMMA representative from precinct 15. My wife, Jane Flanagan, is TMMA Vice President. Article 35 is opposed by the Executive Board of TMMA for a reason. Article 35 represents the Facebookization of the town meeting listserv. Make no mistake, the town meeting listserv is no prize. Voting down Article 35 is not going to make it better. Only elections will make it better. Until then, at least it won't be the public face of town meeting. The town meeting listserv exists as a forum to educate town meeting members about the various warrant articles and issues they will be voting on. The listserv is supposed to be a safe place for town meeting members to ask questions about the wide range of responsibilities inherent in the position, to learn more about the budget, to answer a question about process, to learn arcane details about OPEB, bond rating, town-school partnership. As we know, it is rarely used for that. Instead, it functions more like the highly toxic Brookline townwide discussion Facebook page that is so embarrassing to this community. Even in recent weeks, we've seen a surge in the vitriol. It's a very unfortunate development and speaks poorly of us. I know for a fact that many town meeting members are intimidated by the listserv and would never go on to ask even the most innocuous question. If the page goes public, that dynamic increases by untold magnitude. Who needs the bullying and harassment that will come from being ridiculed on social media for simply doing the job of being a town meeting member? We'd be better off with no listserv at all than a listserv that can't be a conversation among town meeting members. The same holds true for me in academia. It's a thing I don't really understand, and coming from the world of journalism into that part-time work, I often have to ask very likely silly and obvious questions of my department chair. I would not want my students listening in. Some would liken Article 35 to Article 34, but there's no comparison. The listserv, by and large, is not being used during town meeting, and the listserv is open to every town meeting member. For those town meeting members who are far too polite to get into the mud on the listserv, I am voting for you. You are the ones who will question whether you want to continue to serve if your comments are being fed to Facebook for ridicule and mockery. And make no mistake about it, opening to the public does not really mean what it says. It just means the listserv becomes one more avenue for harassment by people who make it their hobby to be internet trolls. Let's vote down Article 35 and then transform the listserv to what it was intended to be, a forum for learning how to function as a town meeting member.
Thank you, and apologize, Mr. Warren. I didn't see your question of privilege. Go ahead.
Thank you, Assistant Moderator, and my apology for interrupting the proceedings, but I've just become very confused. The town council had said that town meeting members were subject, they were creating public records because of their official capacity of town meeting. Subsequently, a town meeting member said that's not true. It's only because select board and other OML-based members are participating. I would like to have you get this clarified by town council because he was contradicted and I'm confused. Thank you.
Mr. Callanan.
Good evening, Joe Callanan, Town Council. So I think the confusion is the applicability of the open meeting law to select board and advisory committee. There have been previous opinions that them participating in the listserv might be a violation of the open meeting law. The AG's office has opined that they don't want to get into issues related to town meeting. That is recognized by the office as their interpretation, which may be contradicted by future attorneys general, which I want to remind you, we will have a new one next year. So the issue of a public record, and are these public records? I would say they are because of they're created by town meeting members. So they're created by a public official related to the scope of their appointment, town meeting. And if that's the case, then it would be presumed to be a public record unless exemptions apply, such as deals with personal medical history or personnel, 2 N's, 1 L matters. So there's exemptions under the public records law, but an email or group chat created by a town meeting member about town meeting before, during, or after town meeting would be presumed to be a public record. And the example I use with the, the question that I posed, the municipal lawyers listserv, the supervisor of public records has previously determined that postings to that listserv are public records.
Thank you, sir. There does seem to be some confusion or disagreement about this, which I suspect will be resolved over time. I'm going to take some questions from the floor or comments. I'm sorry. Ms. Kovac, another point of order.
Hi, Christina Kovac, town meeting member, precinct 8. I just wanted to respond to town council's interpretation of public record versus open meeting law. I don't think the confusion is in conflating the two. They are separate. I specifically was talking about public records laws as they pertain to town meeting members. Rather than get into a legal debate here back and forth, is it appropriate for me to request that town council look into this matter and officially resolve it from the town's perspective on whether, and this is the question very specifically that there's disagreement, not confusion about, is whether or not town meeting member communications, so this isn't about a quorum, this isn't open meeting law, this is public records, whether a town meeting member's emails are subject to public records. That's the question.
Yep. I'm sure that after this discussion, town council will give it further consideration.
Okay,
and I
thank
will
you. It's
join you in urging that he do so.
Thank you.
Mr. Yassin.
Yes, Martin, you see in precinct 17, as I listen to this, Mr. Gatsby, that to me, the question is, okay, we have 250 or so town meeting members. Is the town council saying that anytime that I have an electronic communication with another member of this town meeting, that I have no right to privacy if my communication is about town policy? This sounds pretty extreme to me. And I
Well,
think,
excuse me, Mr. Yassin.
Yes.
I think what town council is saying is that communications on the TMMA listserv may come under the rubric of public records.
that's not what I'm
every-
understanding, sir. That's not what these people are saying. That's why I'm getting confused. I wish we could clarify that.
Well, Mr. Callanan, were your remarks about the public record of town meeting communications limited to listserv communications?
No, or I'm sorry, again, Joe Callanan, Town Council, no, they're not limited to group texting. They're not limited to postings on the TMMA listserv. If they're a town meeting member, in their capacity as a town meeting member, creates a document related to the matters of town meeting, then the public records law presumes that to be a public record. There are exemptions under the public records law that may apply, but any good public official has two phones. This is my personal phone and this is my work phone. We try to have the select board, has town emails. We try to have, other board members conduct their business on, town emails. My wife in our hometown was serving on an appointed board. She created a separate email just for the work of that board instead of using her firm's email, understanding that her work related to that advisory board would be public records because she's a public official appointed on a board. So, I have high confidence in that opinion. My only question, and I do have, I've tried over the past 10 days to connect with a senior member of the supervisor's office. Unfortunately, last week I had COVID, and this week we're both in the office, but our schedules haven't connect. About the responsibility of retention. What do we do with these? If they're public records, who keeps them and who's responsible for them? That's really the only question I have. But if a public official and their responsibility as a public official is creating documents related to their public office, that's presumed to be a public record. Now, that doesn't mean, during town meeting, if you're checking on the Celtics score, that's not related to town meeting. But if you're talking about warrant articles and talking about appropriations and talking about town business as a town meeting member, and it's a matter that would be coming before or has come before a town meeting, then that's presumed to be a public record.
Well, I'm sure that your opinion comes as a surprise and shock to many of us, but so be it. We have points of order from Ms. Weaver, who thinks we're off topic. Well, Ms. Weaver, I mean, the TMMA listserv communications are what we're talking about here, and they're certainly within the within the scope of what town council is talking about. But go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Ann Weaver, Precinct Town Meeting Member, Precinct 11. I think these discussions are important and interesting, but I do think that they're different than the warrant article that is before us, which is about making the listserv public. The other issues about whether town meeting members can text each other or WhatsApp groups or whatever are crucial questions, but I would like us to get back to the topic at hand. Thank you.
I certainly agree with that, and let's have no further discussion about the issues of the status of town meeting member communications as public records. Let's get back to the subject at hand under Article 35. Thank you, Ms. Weaver, for your comment. Ms. Goldsmith? Oh, I'm sorry. We have another point of order from Ms. Kovac. I hope you're not.
No, it's Christina Kovac, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8. I was about to reiterate exactly what the my fellow town meeting member Ann Weaver just said, is that
okay.
In fact,
Thank you very
town
much.
meeting member listserv is subject to public records, and that's what this is about. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Goldsmith.
Good evening. I'm Jennifer Goldsmith from Precinct 11. I hope everyone is well tonight. I am hopeful to be more cogent than I was last night. I had a sick kid here. Sorry about that. And I also want to add my thanks to Mr. Gadsby for his pinch hitting, and my hope that the Town Meeting Member Association will work with the moderator to develop a transparent application process so that we can have a bench of more assistant moderators so that we can really build the skill set within town. But I have questions for several of the Town Meeting Member Association leadership, and I just want to give a little context for my questions. And for folks who don't know me, I've been a town meeting member for about 10 years. And over the past nearly 4 years, I've worked with Town Meeting Member Association, first on a town meeting member experience survey, on a virtual experience survey following the June 2020 initial virtual town meeting, on the town meeting handbook with former moderator Gadsby and with the current moderator, and most recently on a mock-up of a website to make information way more accessible and transparent. So I've spent countless hours with the goal of increasing quality of communication and transparency and understanding opinions within our ranks, and of how to do our work better for constituents. So for example, you can go right now to brooklinetmma.org and see my latest effort, where you can actually find the results of votes and warrants by night and vacancies on TMMA, of which there are currently 14 of the 34 positions. So I bring this all up just as background to sort of say where my questions are coming from. I spent several weeks working on that website because I think that how we fulfill the TMMA's stated mission, which is among their missions to gather, develop, and disseminate relevant information on town issues to town meeting members and their constituents for the purpose of providing an informed discussion of issues of town meeting. My first question for the TMMA leadership, which pertains to this warrant, is how are we providing information to constituents if we're not sharing the website, if we're not sharing the listserv, if you aren't responding to the idea of a website, which I just have to say, as much as I deeply admire the folks who are the leaders of TMMA, they haven't responded in any way to the website that I developed. I've received a number of evaluations from other people. And if you go to that site, brooklinetmma.org, it makes clear it's just a mock-up, but you can fill out an evaluation and tell us what you think. But what I did get in evaluation responses so far are comments like, I'm not convinced that TMMA is a real organization. It seems never to hold meetings. I'm not sure I would bother to preserve anything from the organization. How often does TMMA meet? To my knowledge, there's never been a meeting. I think there are fundamental issues that need to be resolved. And so
Ms.
my
Goldsmith,
questions, I'm going to
let's-
just itemize them right now, Mr. Moderator, Assistant
Sure.
Moderator. When did TMMA last meet? What has TMMA leadership done to improve communication, particularly for constituents in recent years? And how has TMMA sought to gain stronger skills within its leadership to fill vacancies, communicate vacancies, and add the technical skill set to better fulfill their mission? I guess lastly, I'll ask most personally, I have let you know it's been about 6 weeks since I let you know that my own precinct nominated me to be our representative on TMMA along with Mr. Golden, and I've received no reply on how to follow through on that. So I think part of our problem is TMMA able to fulfill their own mission, or do they need some help? And would the transparency of this proposal help to achieve that?
Yes, let's hear a response from the TMMA to as many of these questions as you can remember, Mr. Friedman. After which we have a motion for the question, which I will allow. Mr. Friedman?
I don't want to ask Ms. Goldsmith to repeat all her questions, but
Who are you?
Harry Friedman, town meeting member, precinct 12, corresponding secretary of the TMMA. I don't
Thank you.
really think this is the appropriate forum. And frankly, I'm not going to answer the questions.
Thank you, sir. We have a motion for the question by Mr. Margolis, seconded by Mr. Levy. I'll allow that. I don't think further discussion, frankly, is going to change minds here. And I think we have heard a full discussion on both sides of this issue. So I will allow the question. From whom? Mr. Rosenthal, what is your point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Well, I don't dilute in any way the praise I gave all you, but I do think you've made a mistake on me today, because I said I wanted to speak, and I said I'm sure I'll be way down on the list. So should I go into chat? And you told me not to, and I do think that was a mistake, and I very much appreciate all your service.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. I was going to read your name. You were one of the, since we have a motion for the question and a second, here are the speakers that I have in favor of this article: Dr. Linos and Mr. Rosenthal, who will be not have an opportunity to speak if the motion for the question is successful. I have Mr. Birnbaum, who has a comment, Ms. Granoff, who has a comment, Ms. Wu and Mr. Ananian, who have questions, Mr. Penzel, who has a comment and is opposed to the article, Ms. Frawley has a comment, Mr. Stokes has a comment and is in favor of the article, and Mr. Fisher has a question. And I think that's it. Well, Ms. Frawley, I'm sorry. Yeah, I mentioned her. Okay, a motion for the question is before you. A motion for the question succeeds, we will terminate debate and proceed directly to a vote on the main motion under this article. If it fails, we'll go back to hearing from those who have not yet been heard from. I think we're ready for a vote. This is on motion to terminate debate, Article 35. Ms. Childs, Ms.
No,
Childs?
I
Ms.
vote no
Childs
to
vote-
terminate
votes
debate.
no. Okay, may I have the count, please?
161 yes, 58 no, 13 abstentions.
161
Yes.
and 68 no.
161 yes, 58 no,
58.
and 13 abstentions.
Motion carries by a 2/3 vote. 161 in favor, 58 opposed, and 13 abstentions. On the main motion on page 35-6, urging the TMMA board to make its listserv public. A yes vote would approve this resolution as a town meeting request or whatever it is. And a vote, no vote will turn the resolution down. And we'll proceed as we have in the past. We're ready for a vote. This is main motion, Article 35, page 35-6. Ms. Childs?
Mr. Moderator, I'm a no.
I'm sorry?
Mr.
no,
Moderator, I
okay.
am a no vote.
Okay, good, good. Thank you.
112 yes, 97 no, 26 abstentions.
Motion carries by a vote of 112 in favor, 97 opposed, and 26 abstentions. Please turn to Article 31. The main motion is on the blue supplement number 1, page 6, moved by Mr. Ananian, seconded by Mr. Gordon, that the town adopt a resolution relating to a November ballot question in the Commonwealth, as you will hear in more detail very soon from Mr. Black. You have 4 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Hello, I am Ryan Black, pronouns he, him, his, and I'm a resident of Precinct 6. As this article's title suggests, this is a resolution that asks town meeting to go on the record as opposing the November state ballot question, which would define app-based drivers as contractors. To give you some context, the Massachusetts Attorney's General Office has an active lawsuit going against Uber and Lyft that asserts the company's drivers should be classified as employees and entitled to all the benefits that status entails. The companies have attempted to get the lawsuit dismissed, but the courts have rejected such motions. In lieu of accepting their drivers to be employees, the rideshare companies, relatively fresh off their victory with Proposition 22 in California, decided to pursue a similar course of action here in Massachusetts. For those who don't recall, Prop 22 was a ballot measure which allowed rideshare companies to continue treating California drivers as contractors, and whose Yes campaign had around $200 million sunk into it. Despite promises made by these corporations that the changes would be for the better, numerous gig workers lost flexibility, didn't secure new health benefits, and didn't receive the promised 120% of minimum wage. Plus, despite these companies saying that they needed the measure to pass to not raise prices, they raised prices anyway. Lastly, BIPOC and immigrant drivers have especially faced reduced wages and benefits. So here in Massachusetts, a corporate coalition including Lyft, DoorDash, Uber, and Instacart has formed a committee known as Flexibility and Benefits for Massachusetts Drivers and given it millions of dollars. These companies are running the Prop 22 playbook here. Note that these companies have done something quite clever here. With the Attorney General's lawsuit, they are faced with either accepting their drivers to be employees or seeking changes in state law. Clearly, they've chosen the latter, and to make it seem like it's in the driver's best interest to support the law change, their initiative offers drivers some concessions. Very minimal concessions, to be clear, relative to what drivers will be entitled to if when they are regarded as employees. Consider how, should the ballot measure pass, the drivers won't be eligible for overtime pay or vacation days, unlike employees, and the drivers would not be able to unionize, again, unlike employees. That was an overview of the ballot question itself, but why ask town meeting to weigh in on this better? Firstly, this issue has tremendous relevance to Brookline because of the many residents who use rideshare services, not to mention the residents who drive for the companies. And the more those residents can hear about this issue from a perspective that isn't of the rideshare companies, the better. Secondly, town meeting, of course, has a history of weighing in on matters of national and even international import with its collective opinion. And lastly, the no campaign for this ballot initiative is, to be frank with you all, facing an uphill battle. Just consider how the tech companies coalition was willing to spend the time and resources to send out very polished mailers to each of your mailboxes. That's just a mailer about a single resolution to one municipality's town meeting members. That should be alarming. The no campaign needs all the help it can get to cut through the volumes of noise plus media Uber and Lyft's millions will buy over the next several months. In closing, I want to give a special shout out to former Vice Chair Raul Fernandez for helping me draft the initial version of this article and seeing the importance of this issue. And please consider, lastly, a yes vote for this resolution is a vote saying you don't think corporate interests should be allowed to dictate public policy just because they have the money to bankroll a ballot question. Please vote yes on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sandman, is he checked in? Okay. Ms. Loveland, Valerie Loveland. Say it again. Mr. Sandman, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Sandman. We're all waiting with bated breath.
Thank you. I've just arrived this minute, actually. Mike Sandman, speaking as former chair of the Transportation Board, in support of voting against Article 31. Massachusetts labor law tightly restricts who can be considered a contractor and has a broad definition of who is considered to be an employee. That offers protection to many people who might otherwise be left without the benefits of employees, despite working in jobs where they're subject to the same control as any regular employee. The advent of the gig economy has created a gray area for both workers and companies. Gig workers control their own hours, supply their own equipment, choose their own workplace or workspace, and often work largely without supervision. Their pay is directly linked to how much work they do. The state's labor laws do not yet account very well for this new category of work, and rideshare drivers are among the workers who fit this category. Many taxi drivers move to driving for rideshare companies to supplement or replace their taxi driving incomes and avoid the $700 a week cost of leasing a taxi. They were followed by students and others who wanted flexible schedules and very part-time work so that they could pursue other interests. The proposed legislation offers a safety net. The proposed legislation that the referendum in November supports offers a safety net for drivers that taxi drivers could only dream about in prior decades, benefits that independent contractors have never had, without removing the flexibility they count on. In contrast, requiring companies to treat either of these groups as employees would limit or eliminate the flexibility that they need and force many of them to stop supplementing their income by doing rideshare work. Companies would control their hours for their own advantage, and drivers would have to adapt. Article 31 asks town meeting to go on record opposing the November statewide referendum that will provide drivers with many of the benefits of employees and yet preserve the flexibility they value. Please support the drivers and vote no on Article 31. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Florio. No. Florio. Valerie will be next.
Catherine Florio, Town Meeting Member from Precinct 10, speaking for the Advisory Committee on Warrant Article 31, a resolution opposing a state ballot question that would define and regulate app-based drivers. This resolution refers to a possible statewide ballot question for the November 2022 state election. This ballot question, if passed, would legally classify app-based drivers for companies such as Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash as independent contractors rather than employees. Employees are entitled to worker protections under federal and state law that do not apply to independent contractors. Some supporters of this ballot initiative assert that the drivers need to have independent contractor status to qualify for flexible work hours. Massachusetts has no law preventing employees from working flexible part-time hours. Every employer is free to permit their employees Every employer is free to permit their employees to work such schedules, and in order to attract and retain their drivers, it is highly likely that the companies would continue to do so. The companies require drivers to sign contracts that expressly state that the drivers are independent contractors, set non-negotiated terms and conditions, and contain arbitration provisions that prevent drivers from bringing litigation. In July 2020, Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey filed a complaint for declaratory judgment against Uber and Lyft, seeking a reclassification of their drivers as employees, qualifying them for Massachusetts wage and hour laws and the protections of earned sick time law and the anti-retaliation statutes. In response to this lawsuit, rideshare companies have begun a heavily funded lobbying campaign to place a voter initiative on the November 2022 ballot that would enact a state law declaring app-based drivers to be independent contractors. They are also lobbying the Massachusetts state legislature to enact such legislation. This is the most heavily funded ballot initiative in Massachusetts history, including $14 million from Lyft alone. This effort is similar to a $200 million campaign by these companies in California in support of Proposition 22, which was passed in 2020 but has since been ruled unconstitutional. The ballot initiative would require the companies to provide minimal benefits and wage guarantees based on the time a driver has spent providing rides for a single company defined as engaged time, and not the total hours they worked, making it difficult to earn these benefits if the driver spreads their time across several companies. These benefits include an earnings floor of 120% of the minimum wage. The law explicitly states that companies would not have to pay above 120% of the minimum wage. Modest healthcare stipends provided by each company for drivers who average in one quarter at least 15 hours per week of engaged time with that company. But the driver would have to purchase a qualifying health plan and show proof of enrollment to qualify. 1 hour for earned paid sick leave for every 30 hours of engaged time. Accident insurance for up to 156 weeks if the injury occurs while the driver is online with the app of that particular company. Disability pay and accidental death insurance of 66% of a driver's average weekly engaged time. Earnings will be included if accident or death occurs while the driver is providing a ride. Benefits such as overtime, vacation, personal, and holidays are not included, and drivers will have to pay the entire 12.4% Social Security tax on their earnings. Companies currently pick up 6.2% of that for employees. As well, the National Labor Relations Act prevents independent contractors from forming a union. Drivers are a diverse group. A majority of drivers work part-time. A significant minority of drivers depend almost entirely on driving to support their family. People working only 10 to 15 hours a week may not realize that they need health insurance and other worker protections as much as someone working full-time. Drivers may believe that having flexible hours make having minimal or no employee benefits or wage guarantees seem an acceptable trade-off. Supporters of this ballot initiative assert that the drivers need to have independent contractor status to qualify for flexible work hours. This is incorrect. Some of the provisions of the initiative might be appealing to drivers since, having been designated by their companies as independent contractors, they currently
1 minute.
receive no employee benefits and may be grateful for any improvement of their situation. However, because most drivers do not spend enough time on actual rides for a single company to qualify for the benefits in this law, these new benefits may be more illusory than real. The Advisory Committee recommends favorable action on Warrant Article 31 as amended by the Advisory Committee and the petitioner by a vote of 12 in favor, 1 opposed, and 7 abstentions.
Thank you. Valerie Loveland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Valerie Loveland. I drive for Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and Instacart as an independent contractor. In the Instacart world, I also had a management position in their corporate office in Boston for about 9 months before I decided that I really wanted to go back to independent contract work, which I did. I am a divorced woman of 20 years. I have a special needs autistic child that I've raised alone. I have been an independent contractor since I was 17 years old. I am 57 now. That's 40 years of experience in the independent contract labor industry. That's very prevalent on Cape Cod, where I am from. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to address your committee and your town meeting and give you an outsider perspective and perhaps a little bit different viewpoint than what you may have within your own city limits. I occasionally get rides into Boston, and I am almost always Ubering out of the city. It's invariable that I get a ride either to Brookline or near Brookline, taking me into Brookline, thereby eventually taking me out of Brookline. I turn on the Uber app anytime, 24/7, and there is a need for Uber drivers in the city of Brookline. There's a shortage of Uber drivers in the city of Brookline, always. Because of this, Uber gives us a better pay to be able to go to your city to drive to accommodate you. And I did hear some back and forth about parking in your downtown business village area. And I imagine there's a lot of people that would utilize Uber coming and going in that area. And this isn't just about driving. This is about getting your groceries delivered. This is about a mom maybe that's home sick with the flu and she can't cook dinner, so she gets delivery from DoorDash. This is about a person who can't drive and has doctor's appointments and has to have their insurance companies pay for a Lyft ride.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. I have never, ever felt like I was suffering. I have never, ever felt like I needed to make a trade-off to be able to be calling myself an independent contract laborer. In no way, shape, or form would I be happy with having myself be another full-time employee or another regular employee, because I would have to be choosing again between my son and a job if I get a phone call and he is being rushed to the hospital for banging his head, and now I have to find someone to replace me or wait to be replaced to be able to attend to his needs, rather than just turning everything off and attending to him as needed. That's why I think you should vote yes for Article 31 and allow the ability for your great citizens to have choices in how they get around, how they get their food delivered, whether they get their groceries delivered, and whether they have the ability to overcome your parking situation. Thank you so much for listening tonight.
Thank you. I call on Rahim Abbasi. ABBASI. Do you have him checked in?
Hi, good evening.
me one
Go
second.
ahead, you're on.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. My name is Rahim Abbasi. I'm an essential worker and a gig worker. I'm here to speak in support of Article 31 and against big tech and their greedy ways. My background is in the transportation industry, which I've been in for over 11 years. I've driven a Boston licensed taxi, drove for Uber, Lyft, delivered for DoorDash, Grubhub, and Postmates. And for the first 26 years of my life, I lived in Allston, Brighton, so I know Brookline very well. In 2016, I fought against Uber and Lyft and their bought and paid for bill in the legislature. Prior to that, the business model was completely illegal in Massachusetts. To be clear, they operated outside of the law for almost 5 years and even purposefully excluded regulators from using their app in order to prevent scrutiny from law enforcement. Because of that, many small locally owned taxi and transportation businesses went bankrupt, and instead of money staying within the local economy, it flowed straight to San Francisco and then to overseas investors. Even now, their labor practices are not only illegal, but completely unethical and put the drivers and public at risk. Under the ballot question at hand, drivers will be put into a permanent underclass of workers with no ability to collectively bargain, no ability to contest their deactivation from the platforms, and to assume all financial liability in the case of property damage or injury resulting from driving for one of these apps. Also important to note, after a similar measure was passed in California, the effective minimum wage for drivers dropped to around $5 an hour, 5 below the state standard in California, Massachusetts, and even the pathetic federal minimum wage of $7.25. To be clear, there's no flexibility or benefits in this ballot initiative that can be offered today or when drivers are correctly deemed to be employees. And all stakeholders right now know that drivers will always be able to work their own schedules, including the driver that spoke before me. These companies are not to be trusted. Everything they do is in the interest of their stockholders and shady investors. They in no way have the interests of drivers or the public in mind. They only wish to pad their pockets. In today's economy, thank you. In today's economy, with exploding costs of living and double-digit inflation, soon to be $6 gas, these companies have cut driver pay 5 times while raising rates on the public, and they continue to tout their innovation and path towards automation. The only innovation they offer is new lies put together in a sleek package. Somehow they still say they cannot make a profit. The question I always ask drivers, and now members of the public, such as yourselves, is that if your employer was spending $100 million on a law to change the way you work, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? And with that, I conclude. I urge you to support warrant Article 31 and come out and join me in November voting against this ballot initiative. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What's the story? Oh, Octavio Mejia Suarez. Well, MEJIA. Yeah, you haven't got him? Okay, Mr. Vitolo, Representative Vitolo.
Mr. Moderator, I'm trying here on the phone, and I think you've got audio, but maybe not video. Is that right? Can you confirm that you have audio?
Yes. You apparently muted yourself, Mr. Representative Vitolo.
We're struggling here. I'm doing my best. Thank you. Again, I am State Representative Tommy Vitolo, town meeting member at large. This fall, voters consider a variety of ballot initiatives. Tonight, we are discussing a ballot initiative related to the employment status of app-based drivers. But before I jump into that, I would be remiss not to mention that the Fair Share Amendment, a tax of 4% on income in excess of $1 million, is also on the ballot this fall, and I hope you will support that one. back on course, this resolution comes at a time when expressing your opinion about the app-based driver ballot initiative is particularly important. The legislative committees on financial services and labor and workforce development are each considering bills related to the classification of app-based drivers. If the Massachusetts legislature takes action on either of these bills before the November 2022 election, the issue will be resolved and the question will not appear on the November ballot. As town meeting members, we have received glossy mailers from a Silicon Valley funded mouthpiece explaining why we should support the initiative. That alone gives me pause. I've been a town meeting member for 15 years, and in my experience, the best material from candidates and advocacy organizations comes on regular printer paper, black and white ink, maybe from Kinko's or an HP in a home office. We, town meeting, have an opportunity to take a stance. Do we want to be on the side of billionaires and tech giants or on the side of people who work for a living? Do we want to support companies whose very business model relies on the deliberate misclassification of employees to avoid full responsibility as employers? Or do we support working class, typically Black, brown, or immigrant people who live in our region? App-based drivers, just like employees everywhere, deserve fair wages, benefits, and working conditions. They deserve to be protected in case of an accident, discrimination, or harassment, whether or not they have a passenger in the vehicle or they are driving between jobs. Supporting this resolution sends two important messages. It sends a message to the legislature that Brookline supports resolving this labor issue by properly classifying the drivers as employees now, so that this issue need not even appear on the November ballot. It also sends a message to our constituents. Brookline values working people, and the right thing to do in November is to vote no. I stand with these workers and urge you to do the same. Please vote in support of this resolution.
There's been a motion by Mr. Tuckman for the question. I'll allow that. Is there a second? Motion has been seconded. So it's a motion to terminate debate. I have the following signed up to speak in favor of this resolution: Mr. Gordon, Mr. Leibovitz, and Mr. Birnbaum, and four drivers: Beth Griffith, Stephen Levine, Philippe Martinez, and Ihab Hilali. I have no one else signed up as opposed to this resolution. I have the following people who would comment in favor of it: Mr. Kushner, Ms. Wu, and Ms. Weaver. And Ms. Leotold has a question. If you vote in favor of the motion for the question, it will terminate debate and we will proceed to vote on the resolution on page 6 of supplement number 1. If the motion fails to obtain a 2/3 vote, we will continue to hear from speakers in favor of the resolution. We're ready for the motion on the question, Article 31. Who's on the phone? Yeah. Ms. Childs? Okay, May I have the vote? Motion carries by a 2/3 vote, 150 in favor, 60 opposed, and 11 abstentions. We turn now to a vote on the motion on page 6 of supplement number 1. It's a resolution that under which town meeting would encourage the citizens of Brookline to vote no on the November 22 ballot question that you've heard described. A yes vote would pass this resolution, encouraging the citizenry as described. A no vote would turn the resolution down. So we're ready for a vote. Main motion, Article 31. 31. Well, that's okay. You retitle it. This is a main motion, Article 31. Pay no attention to what it says on your screen. Yes. 14 no. 23. Motion carries by a vote of 186 in favor, 14 opposed, and 23 abstentions. Final article before you is Article 32, that the town adopt a resolution calling for an end to the U.S. embargo of Cuba, moved by Mr. Ananian.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
The motion is on supplement number 1, page 1, moved by Mr. Ananian. Is there a second? The motion has been seconded. I call on Mr. Black to be followed by Dr. Peter Miller, to be followed by a motion to dissolve town meeting, I hope. Mr. Black.
Oh, thank you. Hello, town meeting. I'm still Ryan Black, pronouns he, him, his, and a resident of Precinct 6. In short, the goal of this resolution is for Brookline Town Meeting to reaffirm its support for ending our federal government's embargo of Cuba, and in turn, urge our federal level representation to act accordingly. Why try to reaffirm this commitment now, you might ask? Well, number one, when town meeting previously passed a resolution on this matter in spring of 2016, Jake Auchincloss was not our representative in US Congress. It was still Joe Kennedy at the time. And number two, the pandemic over the past 2 years has made a number of effects of the embargo far, far more salient. The pandemic has, of course, exacerbated the economic hardships the embargo imposes on the Cuban people. As a quick aside, it's always good to think of foreign policy measures like the embargo as choices whose consequences are primarily felt by normal everyday people just trying to live their lives. And furthermore, the pandemic has highlighted how limiting contact between our two countries during the age of COVID-19 has also deprived this country, the US, of innovation and research. Consider how Cuba has made great advancements in the field of healthcare and medicine. For instance, the country has created its own COVID-19 vaccines. With a lifting of the embargo, productive exchanges of knowledge and collaboration could happen between our two countries. Such opportunities are incredibly relevant to where we are in Brookline, considering the volumes of medical and pharmaceutical research in the greater Boston area. And a quick housekeeping item, this resolution does not task any town staff or body to draft a second communication upon passage. The passage of the resolution itself is sufficient for the message that is intended to be sent. So not trying to create any unnecessary work for our already overworked town staff here. And to close, thankfully, we've seen the Biden administration roll back some harsh restrictions on Cuba imposed by his predecessor, but unfortunately, the embargo itself still remains. And in a just, equitable, in internationalist-centered foreign policy is not one that includes any measure which imposes
minute.
such the aforementioned hardships on a country's everyday people. So please vote yes on this resolution to send an important message to our federal level representatives. And thank you. And I wish you a happy end of town meeting.
Dr. Miller?
Thanks. Good evening, Mr. Moderator and town meeting members. I'm Peter Miller. I'm a former town meeting member and a petitioner of a similar article in support of ending the embargo at town meeting 6 years ago. When I learned about this new article, I knew I wanted to speak to clarify some of the things I read and offer some brief words about why now is an important time to be passing this. First off, to correct and clarify, the town meeting report on the article noted that the vote was not known, but the fact is that it was overwhelming in support by a 95% plus majority that is visible from the televised recording of the hand vote that's still available. It's important to appreciate too for this town meeting that this support officially made the effort to develop local resolutions a truly national campaign. It began at the beginning of 2016 with 3 Bay Area communities. And since we passed our resolution, more than 24 other municipalities and major cities and over 36 other governmental entities have passed similar resolution. This brings us to 2 especially timely reasons for supporting this article. The current political situation makes this especially timely. Not only do we have a new congressional representative to send our message to, but nationally, the Biden administration is backing away from its continuation and deepening of Trump's increased sanctions. He's tried to take back his initial disinvitation of Cuba, along with Venezuela and Nicaragua, to the Summit of the Americas that's going on now. He's reopened joint immigration talks. The administration is lifting some travel and family remittance restrictions. He's made a beginning effort to return to his campaign promises to support the Obama-Castro normalization efforts. And this is something we should applaud and encourage, and supporting this article will do that. At the same time, locally, last year's Cambridge City Council passed its second resolution also. A good number of Boston City councilors are supporting a Boston resolution due to be formally voted on later this month, and Somerville is considering a resolution too. In sum, Brookline can help make an important contribution to the grassroots effort to build a healthier and more just US-Cuba relationship. I thank you for your support for this article.
On the motion on page 1 of supplement number 1, that the town adopt a resolution calling for an end to the U.S. embargo of Cuba. If the motion succeeds, it will be transmitted to our U.S. representative and others. If it fails, it won't. On the main motion, Article 32. Ready? Ten seconds. The vote? 146 yes, 19 no, 43 abstentions. Motion carries by a vote of 146 in favor, 19 opposed, and 43 abstentions. Mr. Burstein moves to dissolve town meeting effective at 5 p.m. tomorrow, June 9, which will give you all an opportunity to review and contact the town clerk if your votes have been improperly recorded for a reason, a valid reason. The posting will be tomorrow morning, as always, the posting of this evening's votes. And the dissolution vote, as I say, will be effective at 5 p.m. tomorrow. It's moved by Mr. Burstein, seconded by Mr. Gladstone. Pardon? Seconded by Mr. Schwartz. On the motion to dissolve. We're ready. You have 45 seconds to register your, if you vote in favor, we dissolve town meeting effective 5 p.m. tomorrow. If you oppose this motion, I frankly don't know what happens. And let me comment that the votes for the second night of town meeting were not posted because there were no votes taken. We were in the middle of the budget debate. So that's the reason for that. And I've asked the town clerk to post something on the website to indicate that. Vote is complete. What is it? Motion to dissolve carries by a vote of 207 in favor, 3 opposed, and 4 abstentions. I dissolve our annual town meeting effective 5 p.m. tomorrow. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and have a splendid summer.